Today we'll be drawing cubes. What up friends, Ron here. Thank you for joining me in another video. So meet my props. We're actually not gonna use them, so I hope you're not disappointed. We're gonna get rid of them. We're gonna just focus on drawing cubes, and if you remember my recent how to draw 3D shapes video, there were a lot of requests to dive deeper into some of the topics, and I decided that I will do this starting with the cube because it's one of the simplest shapes out there. Okay, so what I want to do basically, and I will expand on this in a few moments, is I want us to have a reminder of how to draw a cube and how to turn it around in space and imagine it and really draw it from imagination. Then I want us to practice adding light and shadow to it. And finally, we're going to look at putting it into one-point perspective. Okay, there are a few types of perspectives. We're going to focus on one-point perspective. Throughout this video, I want you to leave a comment below and let me know if the way I explained is clear to you, okay? And if you feel like you need some strengthening on some of the things I touch upon, okay? Because this is a very technical subject. So I really want to understand if there's something you want me to repeat or maybe explain again, or even zoom in on and make an entire video on, okay? Because a lot of people ask me to go deeper into some of these topics, and I think this is a good way to start. I plan on touching all sorts of different three-dimensional shapes, like just balls and cylinders and boxes and all sorts of different shapes and different concepts, one-point perspective, two-point perspective, three-point perspective, shading and light and all of these cool things. This is a huge, vast topic, okay? So there's a lot to touch upon. This video is going to be a little long. I will add timestamps at the bottom in the description box, talking about when I talk about drawing the cube, when I talk about shading, and when I talk about perspective, so you can easily navigate the video, okay? So let's change the angle and get started. Okay, so let's get started here, and I want us to touch on three things. First, we're going to have a reminder as to the shape of the cube and how to portray it in different angles and kind of rotate it in our mind. Then I'm going to add the dimension of shading and shades and light. And finally, we're going to touch upon perspective, okay? Because a lot of people wanted to dive deeper into this topic, and I think the cube, for example, is a good place to start. So let me zoom in here on the left section and we'll get started. Okay, so first off, let's talk about the cube itself. So a cube is composed of squares, meaning each plane, each side of the cube is a square. Now, you can also have a box, which is basically a very similar shape, but it's not composed of squares, okay? So if we start to draw just the simplest kind of cube, we will have a square here. Just this very simple square. Now imagine I'm going to draw a square for the lower part of the cube. So basically I'm just drawing two squares with a bit of a distance between them. And then I just connect all of the edges. So this shape is a square. This shape is also a square. This shape is also a square. This one is also a square. This one is all of these are squares. Okay. Now what we do see from this is these lines. And if the cube was to be transparent, we would see these lines as well. Okay. So it's a bit squashed, so you'll forgive me about that. Let me try and get one that looks a little better. So maybe something like this. And you can just practice drawing cubes this way. It's very simple. You just kind of draw a square inside a square. Now, as for the distance between the two squares, this is, for example, one on the top, one on the bottom. You do need to get that distance to match in order to create a cube and not a box. What do I mean by that? So let's say I draw a square here. And I draw another one, but instead of drawing it like this one, I'm going to draw it down here. Okay? So what we get in this instance is not a square, we get a box. A boxy shape, okay? So let me go over the lines that are visible, because this may confuse some of you. So these lines are visible, and we have these lines, okay? Let me know in the comments below if you feel like this is clear to you, just what I'm talking about now, the very basics, okay? So if I were to draw this one just at a different angle, it would look something like this. Okay, so we have here a rectangle of some sorts. Sorry about my inaccuracies. I just got a rectangle in perspective. So imagine this line goes like this. And then we have all of these lines here and the bottom rectangle, which mimics the top one. So this one isn't a cube because these aren't squares, okay? This one may be a square. This one also may be a square, but these are definitely not squares, okay? So this is the basics in terms of what the cube looks like or what the box looks like. They're both very similar, so you can practice both. It doesn't really matter, okay? Now let's move into the bottom part here and just talk about a bit about rotating the cube, okay? We may need some more space for that later. So if we want to rotate the cube, we need to imagine how we see more of one side and less of another side, okay? So if we were to take this sort of a box, or maybe let's stick to the cube for now. So if we were to take this cube and decide to rotate it like this, what will happen is we will see less of the top plane, okay? Because think about it, we're holding the cube and we're turning it away from us. So this side goes away from us. Okay, now it's facing us, now it's not. So I'm gonna rotate it right here. So if we see less of it, what happens is it effectively gets squished together. So instead of a square, we're gonna have this sort of a funny squashed square. Okay, let me just go over the lines in a more accurate manner. So we have this sort of squashed square. Okay, if we were to stretch it, it would be a square. But right now we squashed it. Now, the bottom part mimics the top part mostly exactly the same unless we put perspective into it. But for now, we're going to leave it out of it. So what will happen is we'll have another identical square. Okay, now it's a bit tricky. In this position, you want to place it properly. So I think this will be a good part for this area. So I'm just going to repeat what I see here, basically. So this one is parallel to this one. And this one's parallel to this one, and of course we have these ones that are invisible, you don't even have to draw them. And now I'm connecting all of these, and basically what we got is the same cube, only rotated, okay? Now you can play around with this rotation in many different ways. You can turn it right, left. Just a good exercise is actually to hold a Rubik's Cube and rotate it, okay? And then taking a look at it and seeing how one part disappears, another one appears, okay? So if we were to take this cube and rotate it to the left, okay? So we take it, we hold it, and we rotate it to the left. What will happen is, let's imagine we see the same of this area, but this side will disappear a bit, okay? So it will get squashed once again. So let's squash it. So instead of having a line go like this one, we're gonna have it go like this, a little smaller, okay? Now from this side we see more of, because it's rotated more towards us. So this line is going to be a little longer to make up for the loss of this line, okay? Now these two are basically parallel to these ones. So we have one that's parallel to this one and another that's parallel to this one, okay? So I'm going to go over them just so you can see them better. And again, let me know in the comments if this way of explaining this makes it clear to you, okay? And now we have the exact same thing at the bottom. So I'm just going to pull down an imaginary line, not an imaginary, but just a guideline for me, and draw a dot here. And now what I want to do is, just like in this example, I want to mimic these lines, okay? So I'm going to mimic these. And to do that, I can kind of ghost around, get a feel for it. It's a pencil, so I can sketch it. I don't have to put in one strong line. It's just my way of doing it. So I'm putting in that line. And I'm putting another line that mimics this line. And I'm closing it off. And what we got is the same cube, only rotated a little to the left. Okay? So now we see more of this side and less of this side. Okay? And if we were to turn this cube to the right, we will get back to this position. Okay? So this is how it works in terms of the shape of the cube. There can be some more extreme angles. There are also like extreme cases. If you're looking at the cube straight from the front, you'll just see a square, okay? And this is one unique case you want to take into consideration, because what happens is that we just don't see the back side of it. So if this is the back side of it and it's behind here, we don't see it, okay? This one is in perspective, so I don't want to complicate it, but basically imagine we don't see the back side of the cube, okay? So we have some cubes, we have some boxes, we talked about how to rotate them. Remember that there's always a compromise. If you see more of this side, you will see less of this side. If you see more of this side, you'll see less of these two sides, okay? So this is how it works. Now let's talk a bit about light and shadow. So first off, I'm gonna just draw another simple cube here. I'm gonna make it a little different from the ones we had so far, just to make it a little more interesting, I guess. So we can kind of see a lot of this side here. It's not perfect, but that's fine. Now, depending on where the light's gonna come from, we will have different scenarios of shadow, okay? So we have two main shadows I wanna talk about, and you can go really deep into the topic of shadows and shading, but for now we're gonna keep it simple, okay? So there are two types of shadows, basically. There are shadows, or rather shades, on the cube, meaning if light would come from here, we will have a dark area here. If light would come from here, we'll have a dark area here. If light would come from the bottom, we'll have a dark area here, okay, at the top. So this is the shades on the cube. But we also have a cast shadow, meaning a shadow that the cube casts. This can depend on the surface on which the cube stands, and I will show you how to do that. But let's start now with the shades. So imagine this cube is just floating somewhere in the middle of the room, okay? Nothing interesting is happening to it, it's just standing there. And let's imagine we're turning on a light switch on the right side. So what would happen is the side that is invisible to us will be hit directly with light on it. Okay, so imagine the light is coming from, let me better demonstrate this for you. So the light is coming from this area, like this. Okay, so it's coming straight from the front, okay? So hopefully this arrow makes things a little clearer. It comes from this direction, and it hits this side of the cube dead on, okay? So this side that we do not see is the lightest. These sides that are a bit on the side are a little darker, and this side will be the darkest. So basically what we can do is just start darkening this whole thing up, okay? And this is not the perfect pencil to do that with. You can use maybe a 6B pencil or something along the B's that's very easy to shade with a very soft lid, okay? But basically this is good enough for now. So we have these sides slightly darker, but this one's supposed to be much darker. So we're gonna get it darker. Okay, there are a lot of things that influence the shadows and the light, the way they look. It depends on the light source, it depends on the object, on the surface on which the shadow is cast. And so this is really a matter of learning all of these components, okay? The direction of the light source, its strength, even its color can influence the shadow. So these are all things that you will learn with time. But for now, to keep it as simple as possible, light comes from here, this part is in the shadow. Now another interesting thing happens, because the light comes from here, we have a shadow that's cast on the surface under the cube. So let's imagine there's a surface. Let's imagine, in fact, that this cube is resting on a table, okay? Just sort of a kitchen table, and the light comes from here. So what happens is that the shadow continues in the same direction. So it follows the light. And what happens is that it just goes in that direction, okay? In this example. The shadow is cast in this direction. Now, many times what you will see is that the shadow starts really dark and then it lightens up the more you move. So we're just gonna do that for now. It really depends on the light source itself, but let's just give it a very simple representation and focus on the direction with this example, okay? So basically we have a shadow that's casting on the table onto the left, okay? If we'll have other objects here, let's imagine we have this sort of a juggling ball, like something like this. It will also cast light onto the surface, okay? Every object that we'll place here, if we'll have a candle standing here on the table, let's imagine it's turned off, so we don't have more light to take into consideration, but if we would have had a candle standing here, it will also cast a shadow, okay? Everything adheres to where the light comes from, but this time we're focusing on the cube, so we're gonna just focus on that, okay? And every object will also have a shadow on itself as well. So we have this shade and shadow. Now let's look at another direction, for example. So let's take a very similar cube. Maybe I'm just gonna improvise a shape here. And the way I'm doing it in my mind, I just create one rectangle, and it's supposed to be basically a square. And then I connect the edges to another imaginary rectangle. So we got this sort of a box, maybe. Maybe these lines are a little longer than these lines, but that's fine for the sake of our example. So let's just imagine light comes from here, okay, from the left. So if light comes from the left, the shadow will adhere to the direction of light and will be cast, assuming there's a surface under the cube, to this direction, okay? So let's imagine we have a sharper, crisper shadow, and it just kind of ends somewhere around here, okay? Basically, the light should be at a slight angle for it to end here. If we have a shadow coming dead on from this direction, the shadow itself will stretch to infinity in theory, but it will disappear when the light does not affect it anymore. Okay, but let's keep it simple for now. We'll have it like this. This side is hit directly with the light, so it's gonna be very bright, possibly white, okay? And these areas are gonna be a little darker. So we wanna get them darker. And I'm using the simplest method of making them darker just by filling them in like this, okay? I'm not even doing cross-hatching or anything complicated. I'm just moving my pencil, okay? And we will have this shadow here that's being cast onto the surface, okay? So these are all very common kind of light and shadow scenarios. Let's imagine this is the table here. Let's even give it some more definition, just so it's a little clearer when you look at it. Let's give it a few even legs here, just to make things as clear as possible, okay? And this will be applied to the table as well. So if strong light comes from here, these sides of the table are gonna be a little darker. And also, the legs will be a little darker. Now, these legs appear to be rounded, so I'm doing a gradated change from dark to light. The cube has very sharp changes in direction, and so it has very sharp shades as well, okay? Now, if we were, in theory, to add another object on top of this cube, let's say another cube just standing on top of this one, it will have the exact same influenced by the light, okay? So this front part will be lighter, these areas will be darker, and it will be visible in the shadow as well, as long as the light source is strong enough to create a shadow that casts this far off, okay? So this is basically, in terms of shading, I think everything you need to know for now. There are a few, for example, let's create a rather unusual shading situation. So usually we're used to naturally having light come from the top, from the sun, okay? This is why when people sit around the fire, the light comes from the bottom, and it's very unnatural, and it can look creepy as well. We're used to light coming from the top. So for example, if we have this cube, and let's imagine light comes from the bottom somewhere, okay? We'll have this top area very dark, okay? And maybe the sides will be slightly dark, okay? So this is a more unusual, a more unnatural sort of light condition, but it does exist. If you move the light around, the shadows will move as well, okay? So just have that in mind, that it is possible to have different light conditions, okay? Now for the final part, I want to talk a bit about perspective. Now I'll probably need a bigger piece of paper, but just to explain the basic concept of it, I'm going to use a very small piece of paper. So let's imagine, and for perspective, it is very helpful to give some borders to the scene we're drawing, okay? So I'm going to just add some borders here. And you can imagine this is a picture hanging on a wall or something like this. Now, the most basic component in perspective is the horizon line, okay? Now, the horizon line can have different heights depending on our point of view. The horizon, of course, stays the same, but when we move, the horizon line moves with us, okay? But for now, let's keep it simple and place a horizon line kind of here. Okay, now I want you to imagine a very simple scenario, and this video is going to be a little longer than I intended, but I think this is useful to know. Okay, so let's imagine a scenario in which we have the easiest example of railroad tracks. So let's say we have these railroad tracks, and we're looking at them straight from the top. Okay, so imagine we're maybe looking at them from an airplane or a helicopter, and we just see the tracks moving like this. Now, the thing is, one of the most basic rules of perspective is that parallel lines meet at infinity. And to represent that infinity, we use what is called the vanishing point. So I'm going to place this vanishing point, and you will soon understand its job here. So I'm going to place this vanishing point right here on the horizon. And then I'm going to pull two lines from it, because remember, parallel lines meet at infinity, which is the vanishing point. So we have this sort of lines that meet at infinity. Now, if you notice, this line here is parallel to this line. This line is parallel to this line. Okay, so all of these are going to meet at the imaginary infinity point, which is the vanishing point. These lines, however, are not parallel, so they're just going to stay there like this, okay? Kind of like that. And you get the classic railroad tracks example. A lot of the time people add some sort of light, maybe electricity poles to it, just to make it a little more obvious. So we have this sort of electric lines running. This should probably be like this, and so on. Okay, and if you add light and shadow to it, maybe the sunlight is coming from here and they cast like a really long shadow, and a lot of things can happen. Okay, but this is the most basic example. What we're gonna do now is I'm gonna put a fresh piece of paper here, and we will do the exact same thing for the cube. Okay, we're just gonna place it in 1-point perspective. Okay, so let's get started here and dive deeper into perspective. So again, it's very helpful to have a sort of a border for the scene you're working on. So I'm just gonna lay down very basic border. So again, we want to place in a horizon line. So I'm just gonna put it in here, a straight line, very simple. Now, I'm gonna place a vanishing point on this horizon line somewhere around here. So with the cube, it's basically the same. What you want to imagine is, if you have the cube and it looks like this, I want you to sort of imagine, and sorry about this lame cube, I want you to imagine that this bottom part of the cube is resting on the surface, on the ground here. So I'm just gonna create a few lines to guide me, okay? This is just for me, and I'm gonna choose these to look good. So this is where I'm gonna place that lower part of the cube. Now remember, parallel lines meet at infinity. So what I'll get basically is that these lines follow the lines coming out of the vanishing point, and this line sort of closes it off. So this is now this shape in perspective, okay? So now what I'm gonna do is create, and remember, we just want to create a similar one on top of it, okay? Now, because we're doing it in perspective, the easiest way to do this is to actually pull down these lines, and some of them are imaginary because they're not gonna be this long, okay? So I'm just pulling lines coming out of the corners of the cube. Now, some of these we will use. Basically, what we need to understand is how we cut this into a shape of a square, okay? And it's gonna be done by using this kind of line coming out of the vanishing point. The question is it this line, is it this line, is it that line? So for now, I don't want you to worry too much about this, because this is just trying to be accurate, which is good, but you don't have to be 100% accurate. Now, I just want you to understand why this happens, okay? So we have this line here and this line here. Imagine that it's these two lines, okay? You can see these are parallel, so they meet at infinity, which is exactly what happens here, okay? Now, these lines are going to be these lines, which are also parallel to these lines, okay? So these are all going to meet at infinity. So this is basically what we're doing. We're just using this vanishing point as a nifty trick to draw these lines in a way that will be realistic and conforms to perspective. So we want this line to be equal in length to this one, and this includes a lot of measurements, so I don't want to go into that, and honestly, I'm not doing it that way too. So I'm just gonna use one of these lines, okay? So let's imagine this one, and you'll see it will look great regardless. So this line is this one, and I'm just gonna connect it to the corners of this sort of rectangle. Like this, okay? Now, this line is parallel to this line because it's this one. So I'm just gonna draw it out as parallel as possible to this line. And I'm gonna drop another line here. And here we have it, that's a cube in perspective. Okay, that's all there is to it. If we wanna turn it transparent, so we will have this line meet the vanishing point, and then we'll complete this with another line like this. Okay, so this is basically a cube. Now, it's transparent right now, which may confuse you. So let's seal it off. And how will we do that? Just by adding some light and shadow. So let's imagine light comes from the right, and let's keep it right, okay? Just a very simple direction with no regard to the height. So this side of the cube, which is this one, will be hit by light directly. So it's gonna stay rather light. It's gonna be so light, in fact, that all of these lines here aren't necessary, okay? Now, this side is gonna be a little darker, so we're gonna just darken it up and seal it off, okay? It will lose some of its transparency in the process, okay? It may look a little transparent still, so I'm just gonna erase some of that and replace it like this, okay? Now, because light comes from here, we will have a shadow casting on the ground, and we're gonna just place it here, okay? Now, it comes out from this corner and it continues from this sort of corner in the distance. So this is the cast shadow of that cube. Now, probably due to inaccuracies, this isn't really a cube, it's too long, so it's, in reality, this one is probably looks a little more like this, maybe, so not a perfect cube. Okay, but I tried my best, and really just, this is a matter of sometimes measurement, and I just want you to understand the simplest concept, okay? Now let's do another one of these, and I'll just show you a really good exercise for better understanding this, okay? So I'm gonna, again, create some borders for my scene. And now I'll show you a really cool way of practicing this just in a more intensive way, let's just say. So let me just strengthen these borders. Now, instead of drawing the horizon line in the lower third like I did here, I'm gonna draw it a little taller this time. Why? Because I want to see more of the ground. Okay, it's as simple as that. I don't want you to get too confused with where to draw it. I just notice how I see more of the ground when I do this, because this is the sky and this is the ground. So I'm gonna place in a vanishing point, and we're gonna keep the vanishing point consistent just to make it a little simpler for you. Okay, now I can just pull out a lot of lines from the vanishing point, and these are really random, okay, but you can see how it starts to feel maybe like ground, okay? Just pulling out some more of these. And if you want to be accurate, you can use a ruler. I'm just freehanding it now. So now, in addition to these lines, which are all parallel, remember, they're all meeting at infinity. So if we would look at this from the top, we will just see many parallel lines, okay? I'm gonna now add a lot of horizontal lines. Now, because we go into the distance, the more we go into the distance, the closer they'll become, okay? Kind of like this. All the way to the vanishing point. Okay, now I'm super inaccurate here, but just remember to draw them parallel to the horizon, not like me, okay? So, sorry about that. Now you can see a lot of squares have been created automatically. These all have a potential to become a cube or a box. So we can just choose a few and create a box. So maybe let's go with a large box and let's place it somewhere around here. Okay, so let's choose this sort of a square or rectangle. Okay, so we have the bottom side of the cube. Now all we have to do, remember, is to draw these vertical lines. Okay, now in this instance, it's gonna be a really easy to draw cube because we don't see almost anything. So I'm just pulling the line from here, drawing a line here that's parallel to this one, and this is it. We have a cube, okay? And I'm gonna delete erase all of these ones. So this is a cube, and you just can't see most of it, okay? If you want to see it, we can turn it transparent, we can connect these areas together, and there we have it, a cube, okay? So very simple cube. Let's now choose another one and maybe make it a little smaller. So let's go for maybe this one here, okay? So I'm gonna choose this small sort of rectangle, and I'm gonna again create imaginary vertical lines, and I'm gonna decide where to cut them using one of these lines. So maybe I'll cut it around here, this. So now we have this and this one, they are parallel. We can close off this side first. You can do this in whichever order you prefer. Close off this side, use this line here, use this line here, and there we have it, another cube. Okay, so you can see this is fairly simple. We can use another one, maybe even a small one, and you can see this is not a square, this is more like a rectangle. Okay, so even better. We're gonna pull some lines, and let's make this one a little taller. Okay, so we're just gonna choose some random lines and cut them somewhere around here. Okay, now it becomes a little small. Hopefully you can still make out of it what's going on in there. So here we have all of the lines and the top part that is barely visible because it's very tall. It's taller than this one because if you continue this line, you see, it's taller. Okay, now notice how the taller it gets, the less we see of this side, of the top side. Okay, now the taller it gets, and once it goes through the horizon line, above the horizon line, we won't see it. When it's on the horizon line, the top plane of the cube is flat. Okay, so if we were to create a cube here using this sort of square, and we're going to continue it exactly until it touches the horizon line. Okay, the top plane is going to be flat like this. Okay, if we were to continue it above the horizon line, we won't see that top plane at all. Okay, so for example, this with this imaginary sort of structure or whatever it is. Okay, so this is sort of how to create a scene in perspective, add a grid, a very simple grid, and just place cubes on it. And this I find is a really good exercise. Okay, so let's just conclude what we've had so far. So first off, we just practiced drawing the cube in different angles. Do that, you will get it really fast. Okay, it's just basically a square, another square, connect all the lines, and you have a cube. And I'm doing it on purpose, really rough and really quickly. Okay, you can decide to create a square here and a square here, and then connect all of the lines. If it's easier for you than squares on top of each other, you can use squares next to each other. Okay, and we talked about how to rotate them. Next, we added light and shadow. The shadow conforms to the shape of the cube. So if light comes from here, which is a case we didn't look at, the shadow will conform to the shape of the cube. So we'll have this sort of shadow. And these areas are going to be a little darker. Okay? And then finally, we talked about putting things in perspective. Okay? So I hope this explanation was clear, and now you have a better understanding of cube, and you can just go ahead and practice all of these. Okay? Let me zoom out and change the angle and wrap up this video and talk a bit about drawing three-dimensional shapes. So friends, I hope you enjoyed these exercises. These are, again, I try to make it as simple as possible for you to understand because these are very technical topics. And so I feel like this is my strength, actually. These technical topics, the things I struggle with are a little different. But these topics I feel very, very confident to talk about. And so again, as I mentioned, I want you to leave me a comment below and let me know if there's something that is still not 100% clear to you. If you want just for me to expand on some of the topics here, because we can keep zooming in more and more and more, okay? What I plan on doing is continuing releasing these videos and just focus every time on a different shape, and then maybe simultaneously we can maybe break aside and talk about like as a tangent or maybe as a complete video on perspective and shading a little more. Okay, so let me know what you'd like to see more of. Thank you so much for the requests on the previous one. It really helped me to come up with more ideas. Okay, so I want your opinion and the things you need help with. So if you enjoyed, don't forget to subscribe to my channel where I share more of these videos. There are a lot of past videos as well. I'll probably make a playlist for these kind of 3D, drawing 3D shapes thing. And yeah, so just stay tuned because there's gonna be a lot more of these videos and I want you to be in the loop, so don't forget to subscribe and also follow me on Snapchat and Instagram. I do share a lot of updates there from my daily life, from me sketching and drawing and painting outside, so you can find a lot of interesting things there. And this is it. I will see you again in the next video.